In 1967, New York Jets Hall of Fame legend Joe Namath became the first NFL quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards in one season when he threw for 4,007 yards. No quarterback would do that again until 1979 when this guy came along, broke Joe Namath's record by throwing for 4,082 yards. In 1980, Fouts would break his own record by throwing for 4,715 yards and thus becoming the first player to throw for 4,000 yards 2 years in a row. In 81, Fouts would again break his own record by throwing for 4,802 yards, of course becoming the first quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards 3 years in a row. It took the NFL players' strike in 1982 to stop Dan Fouts from throwing for 4,000 yards. That year, in 9 games, he threw for just shy of 3,000 yards. If you prorate the yards he threw that year into a 16-game season, he would have thrown for 5,125 yards. Fouts was drafted in the 3rd round by the San Diego Chargers in 1973, and he struggled mightily his first few years until a guy named Bill Walsh became the Chargers offensive coordinator. And it wasn't until a couple of years after that, when Don Coryell was hired as the head coach in 1978, that Fouts really began to blossom as a quarterback. Like I mentioned a minute ago, it was in 1979 that Fouts broke Joe Namath's record for most passing yards in the season. He also led the league that year in completion percentage at 62.2%. And he broke a lot of records in both his collegiate career and his NFL career. He broke a lot of San Diego Chargers franchise records. But the one thing he emphasized his whole career, I read it over and over again when I was researching this video, is that he would say all the time, I'm in this game for one reason, and that is to win the Super Bowl. In that first really good season in 1979 that he had, he finished second in MVP voting behind Earl Campbell. And I just want to emphasize second behind Earl Campbell. And I'll get to that in a minute or two when we talk about, I think it was his 81 season or his 82 season. Doesn't matter. I'll figure it out by the time I get there. But in 1980, of course, he broke his record again, smashed it by almost 700 yards passing. And that year, he also broke the record for attempts in a season at 589, completions in a season, 348. He had 8 300-yard games. That was a record. The astounding thing about the San Diego Chargers that year is they were the first team to ever have 3 receivers with 1,000 yards. And I actually remember that season, and the thing that I remember about Dan Fouts and the San Diego Chargers from 1980 is they beat my beloved Buffalo Bills in the divisional round of the playoffs that year. The Bills were winning 14-13 inside of 2 minutes to play. The game was in San Diego. I remember it well. I cried. And Fouts hit a 50-yard touchdown pass with less than 2 minutes to go, and the Bills just didn't have time to recover for it. Ferguson had a bad ankle on it, and he probably wasn't going to bring the Bills back if he had another hour, nevertheless 90 seconds. But, that was not a memorable day. It was actually a very memorable day, just not a happy day in Bills country. So in 81, again, he broke his own record. He threw for 4,800 yards for the 3rd year in a row. And he also broke the record again, his own record for attempts. It's over 600. 360 completions, another record. And he led the league with 33 touchdown passes. Okay, so it was 82. It's the year I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about him finishing runner-up to Earl Campbell in 80. 82. So 82, another record-breaking year. He was the first quarterback to ever throw for 400 yards in a game in back-to-back games. And then he also he led the league with 2,800 yards passing. It was the 4th consecutive year that he led the league in passing, which is still an NFL record. So here's the incredible thing to me anyway. In 1982, he was again runner-up for MVP. This time losing out to Washington Redskins kicker Mark Mosley. A kicker How does a kicker win MVP? I actually had to double check that and find a different source to make sure that that was accurate. A kicker won the 1982 MVP award ahead of Dan Fouts, who was an Hall of Fame quarterback. I'm not sure what happened. In 1983, Fouts actually considered joining the USFL. Remember that league, the USFL? And then he ended up signing with the Chargers because, getting back to what he had said his whole career, he wanted to win a Super Bowl. And of course, in the USFL, you're not going to win a Super Bowl. And actually, 1983 was kind of the beginning of the end for his career. He missed a whole bunch of games with injuries. He still threw for 3,700 yards, which is pretty remarkable because even at that point, not too many quarterbacks had thrown for 4,000 yards. Then in 84, he missed a bunch of games again. In 85, he threw his sixth 400-yard passing game, which was an NFL record. He had been tied for quite a while with Sonny Jurgensen, so he ended up breaking that record. And then in 86, for the sixth time, he threw for 3,000 yards, which was an NFL record also. And hey, if you're enjoying this video and you haven't yet subscribed, now would be a good time to hit that subscribe button. Thanks. And then 1987 was his last year. It was another downer year. He had injuries. There was another player strike, missed a whole bunch of time. The Chargers actually got off to a great start that year thanks to their replacement players. If you remember the replacement players, those guys won all three of their games, and the Chargers started the season 8-1, and then lost all the rest of their games. Fouts missed a few of those games due to injuries. He ended up retiring at the end of the year. So he ended up finishing second at the time of his retirement. He was second in career yards behind Fran Tarkenton, who I made a video about a couple weeks ago if you want to check that out. He retired fourth in touchdowns. He was the first Charger to have his number retired. Actually, I read later there was another guy that had his number retired in 1967. I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but then it was unretired for some reason. I don't know if there was a scandal going on or not, but maybe you'll want to look that up. And then, so as far as league passing records, he still holds 2 NFL records. One is for leading the league in passing yards 4 consecutive years, and the other one is for throwing 4 consecutive 300-yard games in the playoffs. So Fouts ended up playing 15 years with the San Diego Chargers, a 6-time Pro Bowler, and was elected to the Hall of Fame in 1993. He became the first quarterback to be elected into the Hall of Fame that had never played in a Super Bowl or an NFL championship game. And if you're a younger fellow than I am, I don't want to give away my age. Well, I have before in the past, but anyway, if you're a younger fellow than I am, you might remember Fouts best for being a broadcaster. After he retired, he spent about 30 years or so bouncing back and forth between NFL football games and NCAA football games as a color analyst. Now, the one cool thing about Dan Fouts, and I know I have some autograph collectors out there, if you write him a letter, he will sign a picture for you. I've got a few of them. And then also I mentioned that the Chargers in 1980 had 3 wide receivers that went for over 1,000 yards. One of them was Charlie Joyner. He also answers his mail. And Justin Jefferson. And I thought I had a Kellen Winslow. He was the 3rd wide receiver with 1,000 yards that year, but I cannot find that autograph. So if you want to send out some mail to some really cool Hall of Famers that actually sign their mail for free, these guys will do it for you. And I know some of you guys don't really care about Dan Fouts. Maybe you just want to know how you can win his 1979 football card. So what you got to do is go back in the video somewhere, or maybe you have an excellent memory, and in the comments, mention how many yards Joe Namath passed for in 1967. And I will take all the correct answers, accumulate them for 5 days, and randomly pick a winner and contact that person and get this card in the mail to them. One last thing, or maybe 2 last things before I sign off. My daughter's in the other room probably listening in. She's got a big cross-country race tomorrow, so good luck to her. And I made a video a few days ago about what I think are the top 25 baseball cards from the 1980s. I had a ton of fun creating that video, and even more fun conversing with some of you guys about what your list would look like. So if you have some ideas about what your list of the top 1980 baseball cards were, check out that video. I'll post it up at the top here somewhere near the end of this video, and check it out and let me know what you would have done differently if you were making that video, because it's a lot of fun to talk about that stuff. It is for me anyway. All right, everybody, have a good night.